welcome back, everybody. So this is session 2 or 3, or however we're going to count these. Again, I'm going to be with you this afternoon and then tomorrow morning, and I'm the pedagogical part of your programming. I think after this, it's almost all content on history that you came to learn about. And just a little bit of background again about me before we get started is that I started my career as a high school teacher in California, where I taught for 10 years, high school social studies and primarily U.S. history, government, and economics. And I went back to school, moved from California to Madison, Wisconsin, and got my PhD in philosophy of education. And there I developed an interest in sort of the ethics of teaching, which is part of what this book is about, is how to think about the ethical dilemmas that arise when you bring politics into the classroom. But the book is also based on an empirical study that I worked on with Diana Hennis, who, and we did a large study that took place in 3 states with 32 teachers and we were looking at teachers who engage their students in discussions of controversial political issues. So my aim today is to maybe get you to engage students in a little more discussion about controversial political issues, and maybe if you already do, learn some new strategies for other ways that we could bring these types of conversations into the classroom. And so with that, I'm just going to talk quickly about flow. This afternoon, my plan for this afternoon is to first give you a short sort of mini lecture maybe on teaching in polarized times. And the book is sort of wrapped around this narrative is that since really the 1980s, I'll show you the story of polarization, every election cycle we're getting more and more polarized as a country, and talking to each other becomes harder and harder. And classroom teachers, as you all are probably well aware, are facing a lot of these challenges. It's making it harder to teach social studies in particular. So I'll talk about how we've become so polarized. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what is a good discussion. So what do we mean when we even have discussion in the classroom? And then we're going to do one discussion strategy called the final word, which will use the reading that was in the packet. And we'll be discussing the ethical dilemma of should teachers share their political views with their students. So that will be a small group activity. And then hopefully we're going to have time to do all of this, which is another activity on deciding what should we teach as controversial in the first place. So this turns out to be a very tricky thing to figure out. What do we put in front of students as something for them to figure out their own views about? Okay, so I would like to, I know you did introductions yesterday, but it's always helpful for me, and if you're all getting to know each other, I like to do this introductions multiple times. So I'm going to have us go around the room one more time again. And if you would just, I'm going to be stand up since we're not in a circle, and because I like to be a pushy teacher. I'm going to have you stand up. Again, remind us, where do you currently live, or so where did you come from to get here today? And then tell me something that you love. And so I'll give you one example of something that, or example of the right lengths of time for your introduction. So I'm Paula McAvoy. I currently live in Madison, Wisconsin for 3 more weeks. And then I'm moving to Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'm starting a faculty position at NC State. And something that I love is that in Madison, it's a great biking town. And so whenever I basically bike to work spring, summer, and most of the fall. My husband bikes anything above 10 degrees. But biking in the summer at night, like going out to dinner and riding a bike home, is such like a magical time. And it just makes me feel like a kid again, and I love it. So would anyone like to, that was probably too long for yours, but would anyone like to be our first something that you love? Thank you. And then we'll just stand.
I'm Michael Watson again. If you haven't met me yet, I live in Nashville, Tennessee. And I have a new love. I had pho. And I love it. What? Pho. It looks like pho, but the menu said pho. It's really good. If you haven't had it, it's really good. Dump all the stuff in there.
Good. We're trying to think. We're trying to think. We're going to go down the road. Okay.
Hi, Ann. I'm Mary Reed. Mary Comfort. I live in Lowell, Massachusetts. Recently moved there. and I love running as an excuse to explore a new place.
So you travel and run around.
Yeah.
My name is Eric Johnson. I'm a teacher in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I'm from Milford, and what I love is where I live is about a half mile from the beach, so it's like a staycation in the summer. It makes the staycation totally worthwhile.
I'm Bob Fenster. I teach in Hillsborough, New Jersey. I'm from Somerville, New Jersey, and I love to write and record music.
Catherine Newt. I teach in, I live in Tobyhanna, Pennsylvania. I teach in East Stroudsburg School District, which is about a 45-minute drive one way. I love books and traveling.
I should have said no one gets to say teaching.
I'm Tony Storch. I live in Greensboro. Welcome to North Carolina. And I also like to record music on laptops.
Hi, I'm Carrie Flynn. I live in Stone Mountain, Georgia, about 30 minutes from here, and I love college football. And not too popular now in Georgia, I'm a big Graham fan.
I'm so sorry.
I'm Katie Martin. I teach in New York City. I live on the land, and I love planting and watering my flowers. Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Harris. I teach in Brooklyn and in the Bronx, and I stayed with my sister the week before I came here, and it was just really nice to be able to talk patois and not English all the time. American English.
Yeah.
With American. So that was really nice.
Hi, I'm Christy. I'm from Marianna, Florida, and I love collegiate sports as well. Go Gators! But in particular, I love NCAA gymnastics. It's like fanatical.
My name is Erin Young. I'm from West Bloomfield, Michigan. I teach in Farmington Hills, Michigan, and I love getting up early in the morning until dark out and sitting in the dark kitchen drinking and hanging out.
I'm Melissa Cohen. I live in Manhattan and I teach in the South Bronx. I love being the student for a change and not being the teacher.
I'm Jake Rhodes. I live in Montana. I love this country, and one of my favorite things is to travel around and just find all these different regions and cultures. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Hirsch. Thousand Oaks, California is where I grew up in and currently live. I love reading books that have nothing to do with the curricula of what I'm teaching. And I took the GRE 3 weeks ago, so I like not having to study for the GRE anymore.
My name is Jeff Frankowitz. I live in New Hampshire. My favorite thing is the White Mountains of New Hampshire. You should all come and visit and spend your money.
My name's Karen Hoppus. I live in Lake Oswego, teach in Lake Oswego, teach in Portland, teach in Vancouver, Washington. Teach in high school. What I love, I'm a pastry chef in my spare time.
Whoa.
So
You do have a kitchen.
I can go about 2 weeks without cooking, and then I start getting itchy. So
If you want to live for us, we're happy to.
I'm William Frazier. It's a pleasure to let you guys meet me. Wrong with the city. I love all sports, and ironically, I love anything that keeps me away from my athletes.
Hi, I'm Emily Glendy. I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I love baked goods. So if I walk by a bakery, I'm going inside no matter what.
Hi, I'm Jess Capadona. I'm from Highlands, New Jersey, and I love any type of water sports, especially kayaking.
I'm Donna Osborne. I live about 45 miles north of here in Canton, Georgia. I love to travel, so I'm kind of enjoying getting to know my city, being in the city since I live in the suburbs. So it's kind of neat to be downtown and go dogs.
Jessica Piper, I'm from Maryville, Missouri. I have 5 kids and I enjoy all of them, but I just had my first grandbaby 2 weeks ago, so I love her. I'm Sam Becker from Worthington, Minnesota, and one of my very favorite things to do if you've already heard the story is watch my son, my dog. He's a goalie. And he's a goalie now.
Hello, my name is Shirley Stanton. I am from here, born like 2 miles across the home, and I teach in Atlanta, East Point, Fulton County. One of the things I love is sleeping. Yeah, naps are
My name is Fernando. I teach and live in Los Angeles, and I love crossing the finish line at a marathon.
We had a marathon traveler
My name is Matthew Shiloh. I live 2 miles north of here. And I love the Atlanta Beltline, which is a kind of bike walkway that they're creating around the city. So Atlanta has become a lot more of a walking, biking city than it was 5 years ago.
Got a glimpse of that yesterday. Great, thank you. I'm gonna not go around the back part, just in the interest of time. But we'll check in maybe later. Great, so I want to turn now to this issue of political polarization and why it is happening, and not really so much what we can do about it, but we'll talk about what we as teachers can do about it. So to begin with, I just want to out myself as not a political scientist, but I happen to read obsessively a little bit about political science issues. So because I'm interested in how teachers are experiencing polarization, these are some of the books on my bookshelf that if you're interested, you might want to take a look at. But I'm going to give you a short talk that kind of encapsulates the overall narrative of why political scientists think that this polarization that we're experiencing is happening. And it is happening. Some people like to think, oh no, politics has always been this way. Yes and no, but not so much. We have something new happening today. So in order to tell you this, to show you just the extent that political polarization is happening, I'm going to start by showing you a series of scatter plots from the House of Representatives, beginning in the 1950s. And this is political science data, and I'll talk you through how to read it, how to look at this. So every red dot that you see on the graph there is someone who served in the House for the Republican Party at some point during the decade. Every blue dot is someone who served for the Democratic Party during the decade. The y-axis is a measure in which they take every single vote that a member casts while in the House, and then it gets measured on an ideological scale. And so if your dot is above the line, if your overall measure of your voting record is conservative, I have a trap door here, but it might fall through in a second. Further from that middle line, which is the 0, so this right here is the 0 of the y-axis, so a positive number is an overall conservative voting record, and if your dot is below the line, you have an overall liberal voting record. A tentative hand is going up.
Yes, I want to know who the outliers are. Do you know specifically who each of the dots on the, like the really very democratic guys and the very
I mean, we could, if I had access to the database, we could name them, but I don't have that right now. So all I have is the overall, is what we have as our overall record. But yeah, it's interesting. See, it's fun to be a political scientist. I wish I had done it. Okay, so if you look in the 1950s, you can see 2 pretty moderate and fairly purple parties, right? So you can't be, they're both basically hugging the middle or the ideological middle of that line, but you do see a good chunk of blue dots above the line, and you historians may be hot on the case of the Southern Dixiecrats, right? So the blue, these were conservative, white, segregationist voters of the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party at the time is this coalition between northern, sort of left-leaning, and southern whites who have an interest in segregation. And then the Republican Party is just a generally conservative, but not totally conservative, I mean, sort of still moderate party in the 1950s. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go forward in time. So the 1960s, you start to see, this is the moment in which political scientists say this, the ideological churning begins in the parties, where we move from purple parties, or we begin the movement from purple parties to what we now think of as a solidly conservative Republican Party and a solidly liberal Democratic Party. And of course, the sort of breaking point that people point to is the Voting Rights Act of 1965, in which the Southern Dixiecrats say to the Democratic Party, no more of this federal intervention in the South. And so we are going to start breaking away from the Democratic Party. Nixon's Southern strategy is to pull those white Southerners into the Republican Party. And so you start the beginning of a more conservative, like the ideological shifting of the parties. In the 1970s, you can start seeing some polls. This churning is still happening. The 1970s also brings in sort of like the beginning of the culture wars. So you have an evangelical right that becomes formerly not that politically active, now starts becoming politically active in the 70s. Especially Roe v. Wade, is ruling comes in the early 70s. You have prayer in schools. There's so these big Supreme Court decisions that sort of activate the social conservative movement. And in the 1980s, you can see that things look like they're kind of consolidating around some polls there. And in the 1980s, all the political science research points to the moment that Newt Gingrich enters the House of Representatives in the early 1980s, and he says to his Republican colleagues, we have not been the majority party in this House for 30 years. 30 years of Democratic majority in the House of Representatives. We have to do something different. And so he reorganizes, he leads a reorganizing of the Republican Party, in which they say, we're going to get on message and stay on message. We're going to look strategically at open seats that might be in danger, and we're going to go after those seats. We're going to share resources in a way that we haven't done before. We're going to use this new thing called cable TV, C-SPAN, etc., to start getting our message out. And we're going to act a little bit more like parliamentary parties and less like the sort of, you just get to be an individual once you get elected to the House. So he starts this change, and in 1992 he becomes, this is the Newt Gingrich revolution, he becomes Speaker of the House, and Republicans become the majority party for the first time in 40 years. So this dynamic starts changing how the parties begin. So now the Democrats respond differently because the Republicans are responding differently, and so we've changed how parties operate and how they think about each other. And so here, from that moment, the 2000s to the 2010s. So we have, if you look at the change from the 1950s to the 2010s, you can see, well, it makes perfect sense that we have stalemates in Washington, D.C., because the middle has disappeared. So as the parties as they behaved differently, they pulled apart from each other. You can see that in the 2010s, the Democratic Party is still more moderate. The Republican, mathematically speaking, those red dots have moved further from the middle than the blue dots. But nevertheless, they do not, you see very little opportunity to reach across the aisle and work together on legislation. So, one reason that we're experiencing polarization is this story, that the parties realigned, that part of the effect of that realignment is that they've lost their ideological middle in the House. The same story basically plays out in the Senate. As House members move to the Senate, they start behaving the same way, and you see a division in the Senate as well. Another major part of the story that often is sort of kind of overlooked in our sort of general discourse around politics is that as this is happening, so it's almost aligned perfectly with income inequality. So the rise of income inequality. So on this graph, what you see on the bottom is the x-axis is time. So from starting in 1947 on this side over here to 2007. And this red line is the House polarization. It's basically that same set of scatter plots, but put into it's the same data in line form, not scatter plot form. So you see low polarization post-World War II, and then in the 1980s or late 60s, you start seeing the spike in polarization. The blue line is the Gini index, which is the measure of income inequality. So the higher the Gini index, the more the gap is between the rich and the poor. And house polarization and income inequality are rising in near perfect correlation, meaning that they are basically feeding off of each other. It's not that one caused one to start, but they rise and fall together. So there was another time prior to World War I in which we had very similar lines, rising house polarization, rising income inequality. And so it seems to be a phenomenon that they sort of go together. I think of them as the exact same phenomenon. So we can't talk about polarization unless we're actually also talking about income inequality. And they feed off each other because one thing you divide about is what should we do about income redistribution, or should we, the biggest piece of legislation that just passed was the tax reform, which will likely exacerbate income inequality. So as money moves into fewer hands, one thing they can do with that money is start affecting the political system. And so you can see how much money is our political system is awash in money. And this is in part because we have a lot of people with a lot of we have a group of people with a lot of disposable income, and they can get their interests pushed through. Okay? So, second reason. So we have income inequality, we have the sorting of the political parties. This has had an effect on us in just the basic citizenry. So looking at this data, I'm going to show you a series of maps, also 1992, beginning in 1992. So keep those scatter plots in mind, and you saw the dividing at 1992. This is presidential election data broken up by county and colored in red, dark red, if the county went landslide Republican, dark blue if it went landslide Democrat, and landslide means the candidate won by 50% or more. Okay, and then lighter is less of a landslide. So I'm just going to move forward in time. So, 2016. So you can see that that where we are living in the United States has changed quite a bit. Question?
Yeah, do you think this is exclusively because of gerrymandering, or?
It's not exclusive, no, it's definitely not exclusive. Gerrymandering has affected House races for sure, but this is the presidential election.
Okay.
And so this is, so it's not it's not by congressional district.
Right.
But now you might look at that and say, well, that doesn't look like a divided country, that looks like a solidly Republican country, right? And you might also say, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote in that election, and that looks impossible from this. And so if we look at the same, this is the same data represented in a different map, but same scheme, dark red landslide, dark blue, or red landslide Republican, blue landslide Democrat. And now if we shrink areas of low population and increase areas of high population, the United States actually looks like this. Wow. So you see the blue emerge because it's in dense urban areas. So here's Chicago, and that's New York City. And so what we are is we've got a red America and a blue America that are divided in an urban America and a rural America. And the effect of this is that we don't talk to people, we're much less likely to talk to people, socialize with people, work with people who disagree with us politically. And when we socialize and talk with and marry and either people who agree with us, what happens is that our views become more extreme. So you go to a dinner party, did you read that story about this? Oh my gosh, can you believe that? What a maniac, I can't, no, she's an idiot. So you start feeding each other's extremism, so to speak, and you become more certain of your own views. You're more certain that you're right, and more convinced that the other party is crazy. So they're actually dangerous. And so we see this, that effect is called affective polarization, meaning it's not parties dividing, it's how we feel about people who think differently than us. So Pew has been doing studies, or polling on attitudes towards the other party. So Democrats, again, 1994, very important here. This is a measure of a percentage of Democrats and Republicans who have a very unfavorable view of the other party. And you can see as we divide, as Congress divides, as we divide, we dislike each other more and more. And we do it about equal rates. right? So it's not that one party is really, open to the other party and the other one's not. It's that we both are feeding our animosity. And so this data shows up that the percentage of each party who believes the other party is a threat to the nation's well-being. So nearly half of each party thinks that the other side is a threat. And when you think the other side is a threat, the good news is you're more likely to participate. So the people who hold these feelings are more likely to show up at the polls, but the people who show up at the polls are more likely to be voting in the exact people that contribute to the stalemates in Washington. So we keep putting, the more extreme people are voting in the more extreme people. So that's the situation that we're in right now. And this is having an effect on young people. So this is from the World Values Survey, which is a survey, an international survey of people living in democracies. And so this came out, the 2011 data came out, report fairly recently. And so if you're looking at generation, so the one question asked was, democracy is a good, very good, bad, or very bad way to organize a country. And these again are people living in democracies. So the silent generation, our oldest living generation, 16% said bad or very bad. Millennials, 24% said bad or very bad. Another question, electing leaders is unimportant. The boomers said 14% thought it was unimportant, and millennials 26% that it was unimportant. So you're seeing a generational shift of people questioning whether democracy is a good idea in the first place. And I was actually working with an undergraduate student to go through this report. And he was himself a millennial, and he looked at me and he's like, I'm beginning to get worried about my generation. And I said, yeah, we're worried about you too. But I said the truth is, we modeled a very bad democracy. We ruined the place. The older generations have let it go. And so we have not been modeling a system that looks at all effective to young people. So imagine only growing up in this very polarized, deeply contentious democracy. So you are a millennial born after 1985.
So we think of them as young, but actually there's a lot of them in here.
Yes, some of you are millennial. I always forget that I have to acknowledge the new teachers. Yeah. So millennials are less likely to want to identify as party members, and that makes perfect sense as well, because they seem to be just money-hungry organizations that are only out for their own self-interest. And so we're modeling for young people a deeply contentious democracy, and the effect of all of this is deep social distrust. So we distrust anyone who doesn't represent, if anyone who's not in your party is in office, you deeply distrust that they'll look out for your interests. We don't trust each other to have conversations with each other. Families get split apart over elections, and so and because we're not living near people where you're going to have sort of healthy disagreement, we live with fear of that rural America doesn't understand urban America doesn't understand rural America. And I think one of the greatest things of programs like this, and taking your students on programs like this, is that you're now in an amazing opportunity. You can talk with people from all over the country and get a sense of what are the issues that matter in your part of the world, or your part of the country. And I hope that you take that opportunity. You don't have to talk about politics like I'm going to try to convince you, but you can go at conversations. I want to understand what it is that your community is concerned about, so that when I go to vote, I have that story in my head too. And that would be an amazing thing if we could all have these experiences. And part of having discussions in the classroom is getting students to have those experiences and to recognize, people disagree, and they disagree for not because they're crazy people, but they actually just see the world differently, or they have a different set of values or reasons. So that's what we're going to kind of work on today, is how can we have some more of those kinds of conversations. So in the middle of all this sits the teacher, right? So this is sort of like my new research project, or building off of this former research project. But so teachers today are sitting in the middle of these competing responsibilities and interests. So teachers have a responsibility. One reason that we started public schools in the first place was to prepare young people for democracy. Probably the number one reason that schools were, that we even started this idea of public schools. But the democracy, so we have to send students out into democracy, but democracy is also pressing down on the teacher. So you've got policies and regulations from your community, state, and nation, and you also have these beliefs and views of polarization that are coming into your classroom. You have reasons, students may carry in reasons from the public's media space that are not helpful to you as a teacher, right? That are going to cause problems for you when kids express those views in the classroom. Parents are also pressing in on the teacher, we should say, or in relationship with the teacher. So the teacher has to be aware that parents have their own set of interests for their children. They may or may not be aligned with what the teacher is trying to do in the classroom. Teachers are also concerned about the well-being of the students in their room. And sometimes you can be in tension with one student needs this and the rest of the class needs that. And now I have a dilemma of how to sort that out. And then you have your own view of professional training. You have your own view of what discipline, what it means to learn history, what sort of history should be taught, how it should be taught. And so that's a responsibility that you have too. And these things can come into conflict and make the teacher's job. You create a dilemma when these things come into conflict. You have to sort out how to deal with these things. So I'm going to pause right here, and I'm going to ask you to just turn to the person next to you. So you're at tables of two, so 2 and 2. And just debrief for a second. In what ways have you noticed these trends in your own school and community? Has polarization affected the curricular pedagogical decisions that you make in the classroom? And if so, I'll give you like 5 minutes to talk.
Okay, so that's
How have you noticed and she was very quiet about it. She did say
Really impressive. Did you guys all have your eye? You just know as students that you have to be looking for the teachers to get Can I just get, I just want to hear maybe 2 or 3 people, just tell me what's going on in your school or what you were just talking about, just as one way to check it.
So I teach in the South Bronx and he teaches in rural Montana.
Yeah.
And we're basically the polar opposite of schools. So I can't find a Trump supporter in my school, and he could never find a Hillary supporter in his school, and we were actually talking about a bunch of other stuff, but then we saw the time was up thing because we started talking about undocumented kids and stuff, and how we were also talking though how staff reacted. It wasn't just kids. It was half of the staff asking me, how could this happen? You know, and me sitting there trying to be like, what am I to have all the answers? But it was interesting because our kids are just completely the opposite.
Right. So in the book we talk, in the book, the political classroom that I mentioned at the beginning, I was talking about this phenomenon of like-minded classrooms, that some teachers may find themselves now feeling like all of the students line up in one direction or the other, versus a purple classroom where you have a lot of competing political views in the classroom. So it changes what you can and should do in the classroom when you have everyone on one side or the other. And you can either feed into them and just keep reinforcing their views, or you can try to get them to say, why do you think that, and can you dig deeper into the issues and sort of complicate the world, which is another response, is to just make, not make the world be so simple with this political system.
Well, I was, we were discussing about the polarization. In fact, I was able to witness it from my high school. When I graduated from high school, the population was like 50% black, 50% white. And I teach there now, it's 95% black, 3% white, 2% Hispanic. And I can almost trace it back to we had a superintendent who was very pro-black. And his solution to the white parent gave him a problem, well, maybe you should move to another district. And they began doing that. So the neighbor across the street moves his son. Well, of course, I'm going to move mine. And after a while, you have a great divide. And now it shows that she was talking about in her district, there's very wealthy families in that district. It's like, well, we have extremely poor ones in mine.
Well, so this is great. This is the other polarization story is that we are at Gallup poll shows 20-year low on race relations, and we are worried that the races cannot get along. So that's having that schools are highly segregated now. We often hold up Brown as this great, landmark case of everything justice being served. But the reality is we are as segregated today as we were pre-Brown. And then the social class segregation. So poor kids are much more likely to go to the school with poor kids, and rich kids with rich kids. And so this, again, we want to be a place where people solve problems together, which is what democracies are. We don't understand, we don't have exposure to all the interests that we need kids to be thinking about. One more comment? Other discussions?
I kind of felt like at my school that kids aren't really that into politics necessarily. You know, like I think I said they were like Fortnite and stuff. Like Snapchat and things like that. But I think the mentality that you're describing manifests in other ways with them. We had some dress code changes this past year, and they were up in arms and just like really dig their heels in, and then the school does too. So I think you see that same mentality of like, you're on the other side, so you're my enemy, and this is how I feel, and I don't care.
Does your school feel politically diverse or politically like-minded?
My district's definitely like-minded, for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so I don't know, yeah, I mean, apathy could be a response to the political climate that we have, is to sort of check out, we're sort of talking about people who, people, friends say, I just can't watch the news anymore, I can't read the news anymore. Which is, it's unfortunate because you need people to do that. We need people to stay engaged in the system, otherwise there will be no system to engage with. But, so these are challenging times, and if we could teach students what democracy is in the first place, that might be one, get a really good understanding. It might be one way to buffer the effects. And to learn to talk to each other, which is what we're going to do next. So that was our teaching in polarized times. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of a good discussion, just to make sure that we're clear when I use the word discussion, what I'm talking about. So sometimes we hear people, you might see a colleague in the hallway and say, what are you doing today? And say, oh, we're talking about, we're discussing the Civil War. And if you went in there, what you would see is a lecture on the Civil War. You say, I discuss at my students. And so that's not what we're talking about. We're going to talk about when students are actually talking. So if we move into the world of discussion and think about what is it how do we get into this blue space called discussion? I think of discussion as happening on two axes. So on one level, so if you think of this as the x-axis here, the level of teacher control. So teachers can have more or less control over the discussion. A lot of what we saw in the study were teachers who did sort of what we call an interactive lecture style. So it was mostly a lecture, but it would be paused every now and then for a little short discussion, a little take comment here, comment there, question here, question there, then go back onto the lecture. Sometimes that turns into a full class discussion, sometimes you just move on with the lecture. That was very common. I'm not saying it's not a bad thing to do, and it's probably a good and engaging way to do a lecture, but it's not quite discussion in the way that we would call discussion for our research purposes, we being Diane and I. And then on the other end, though, you can have very little teacher control. So the teacher who comes in, day after the election, so what do y'all think? And just let it go. And so this is a terrible discussion strategy. I would like to ban the question, so what do you think, from all of your strategies. Occasionally you get a good discussion on that, maybe 1 in 50 turn into a good discussion, but just letting kids without preparation sort of shoot from the hip is a recipe for disaster, especially in today's polarized times, because what you're inviting in is whatever they happen to hear from last night to your third period class. So structures, we need some control over the discussion, and you can sort of think of yourself giving up more or less of it. And then if we look on the other axis, there's a level of conflict that you need for there to be a good discussion. So too much conflict is what teachers often worry about, and so they avoid discussion. If they have this fear, if I start a discussion, I don't know where it's going and what's going to happen, and so I'm just not going to do it. And that's not good, but nor is too little conflict. So, and this is a challenge for those like-minded schools, that If we all already agree, then what's the point of having this discussion? And so we need to find, when we're designing discussions, you're looking for places in which you can create just the right amount of conflict as well. So you need some teacher control, and you need some, you're trying to actually unearth disagreement. So when I think about designing discussions, I mean, like, what views do I need to get into the classroom so that we have just enough disagreement? Because that's the point. The point is to have to struggle through the issue.
So can I, because I'm at a homogeneous school, very like-minded, can I be the person that be the devil's advocate to general, to force them to either change their views or force them to cite evidence for their views?
Yeah, so I would say, yeah, that you're trying to get them to reflect on their views, think of it idiosyncratic. Do you really believe what you think you believe? Do you really know what you think you know? Of course, and we saw lots of teachers at like-minded schools using devil's advocacy as a strategy, and students like it, and it's often very effective. It's still like, it's not that you should throw that away, but can we also include moments in the classroom in which students are actually giving their reasons to each other? And so then you have to find, what some teachers in like-minded schools did was, let me find a controversy on the left if you're in a left-leaning school, or a controversy on the right if you're in a right-leaning school. And so those exist, so you can set up discussions to think, what will these kids think is a disagreement, what will they disagree on, and then set up the discussion for that. But no, I think it's important. Well, and the readings you bring in. So can you bring in readings that give a great articulation of the views they're not going to hear at the dinner table? So that is another way to challenge some like-minded thinking.
Do you see a problem? In mine, which is, they're all like-minded and different than I am. And if I play devil's advocate, I'm just the devil. But, because of social media, they all know, and like, I don't have to tell them my political beliefs because they know.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that about each other too. And they're always like, Justice is a liberal, so-and-so is, and so they know each other automatically, and it's a small school. So that's my thing, is no matter what discussion I bring up, they know where Justice is gonna stand, they know where Hannah's gonna stand, and then they butt heads the entire time. And they do it in my class, then they go to psychology, they do it in there, then they go to history, they do it in there. So, because they know each other.
Right, so couple of strategies is to make people role play, so that they have to take views that aren't the ones they would normally do, and to pick issues that aren't so hot button and pull that they already know. So I have tomorrow I'm going to teach you a structured academic controversy. This is not the question that we'll be doing, but I often do the question, should voting be mandatory in the United States? So that's a question that you don't know which way that goes in a partisan way. So there are these sorts of, like, looking for these kinds of questions that you don't know the partisan answer to is another way to get them used to discussion and diving into an issue and trying to figure it out before, not just pulling from, this is my team, so that's going to be my answer, versus let me figure out what I think the right answer is. So those are a couple of things that we can play around with. But I think role playing, and it is working on why we should be open-minded, working on why it's okay to disagree. Teaching people, asking at the end of the discussion, did anyone change their views, which I'll do with you all in a moment, is a way to think, oh, I can change my view. That's a normal thing to do. When I was interviewing the students for this study, I couldn't believe how we would interview 225 students and ask one of the questions, did you change your views as a result of any of the discussions? And the most common answer was, of course not. Why would I do that? Like, no, that's why you're doing this. That's why you're doing this.
And I think we as teachers have to model that.
Yes.
And say, I change my views all the time. Maybe I'm not a bad thing.
Right. Right. A discussion, an introduction, have the class introduce themselves. Can you think of an issue in which that you have changed your view about? Would be a way to normalize view change.
Something that I like to do in my class, I teach at a school that's very divided. It's a mixed population.
Right.
Yeah, we have a military presence at our school too, so it's very interesting. And something I like to do in my class is I'll put certain statements up on the board, and I literally make the kids get up and move. If you agree with the statement, go to this side. If you disagree with it, and I make them kind of justify their position. And then as they change their mind in the discussion, I have to physically move. And
Yeah.
it always takes one kid to move first and someone clicks in, oh, it's okay if I change my opinion now that I have more.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's always a good way to have a healthy dialogue on a controversial issue.
Right, right. What an idea. Changing your, yeah, over here then. Yeah, how about you first?
So I'm an English teacher and I taught, I opened up the grades with my seniors. And I found that when I did things that were very local, I got a lot of like just tension and division. But when I did things from far away, like I showed radical offense about, the African Americans. So they were saying things that I would like them to be able to say, talking about America, but they just wouldn't.
Yeah.
But this was very unfamiliar to them, and they had all these nuanced ideas and these questions. They had lots of questions.
Yeah.
I'm sure they were doing a lot of the thinking, but that thinking shut down because they were just set in their ways
Right.
when it came to the local stuff.
So a different strategy of like finding the issues that aren't already partisan and polarized to make them be open to exploration. That's great.
Just suggestions from you. So if you're doing role play, and I've done that before, and I've given them a role that's opposite of what their ideology is, they shut down, and I can't ever get them to really engage.
So tomorrow we're going to do a structured academic controversy, which is a very gentle way to get kids to do this in a way that it should teach them it's okay to take this role on for a short period of time. And it's not, they don't have to defend it at all costs. They just have to present it reasonably. So,
They'll say like a one-liner, and then they'll say, well, I don't really feel this way, so I can't really say anything else.
Yeah, so maybe we should talk about this later too, that how we prepare the room for discussion, how you teach what discussion is, or what that's in my next. Well, let me get to that in about 1 second, just looking forward a little bit. So when I think, and when Diane and I were going into classrooms and trying to see, is this a classroom in which good discussions happen? This is what we would look for. Is there a discussable question on the table? So is there a topic being discussed? Are there shared materials? So are there materials, is this just what are you thinking off the top of your head, or have you actually been doing a unit of study or reading various things or watching a documentary that is building knowledge before you discuss? That students are talking to each other, not just to the teacher, so it's very common, and I fall into this myself a lot of times, this sort of back and forth, student, teacher, versus getting students talking to each other. That there's full participation in the classroom. Challenging, but possible. And that students are adhering to classroom norms, so that there are norms, they know what the norms are, and they know how to use and call each other out on the norms. But back to your earlier question. So one thing that's important is that if you want to have discussions in the classroom, is that you need to discuss that discussion is a skill that we are all learning, that we can all improve upon. You treat discussion like you treat writing, where there's feedback, where there's reflection on how did we just discuss, what does it mean to have a good discussion, why do I as a teacher care about discussion, why is, that we're doing this so that we learn to dig deeper into our views, that we learn to give reasons to each other, and that it requires a certain amount of openness. So you're trying to teach kids what these attitudes and the skills and values necessary to have a good discussion. So there's different ways to sort of build discussion as a strategy. One thing, so I teach at UW-Madison. I've developed a program for faculty called the Discussion Project, which is how to teach faculty. It's a 15-hour program on just discussion, so that faculty learn to lead better discussions in the college classroom. And so this is one thing that we talk about, like how do you do reflections on discussion at the end of the day? What did you think you contributed to the discussion? So there's all these different ways to scaffold and build the idea that we're all getting better at this thing, and what it is. That it's a skill. We all can talk, but we don't all know how to discuss well. And so we all need to, and students need to learn that. And your common talkers, the people, your go-to people that are going to participate a lot, they probably are in homes where there's a lot of political talk or talk like this, and it feels familiar to them. And people who are quiet, they're quiet not because they don't want to participate often, it's just that they don't know how to participate, they don't know when to participate, they feel a lot of fear, I'm going to be judged or get it wrong, and so you have to build in strategies that sort of make them feel safe, and that requires structure. So if you want to equalize discussion in the classroom and get lots of voices, then you need to structure the discussion. And you need to start with high structure, low risk, and you can move to sort of more difficult structure. So to really take on a complex role play, that's probably a higher level discussion strategy. But just our little turn and talk right here, that's discussion. Everyone participates. It's easy. It's low threat, low risk, but you're just learning how to do this thing. So mixing it up a lot. Every class I teach does, we always start that everyone will have said something aloud to the whole group on day one, and we'll have talked to at least one other person on day one, and we'll be doing that for 3 or 4 class sessions of a semester, because you want to normalize people hearing themselves in the classroom. So if you don't talk aloud to the group for 2 or 3, 4 class sessions, that you will ever enter that conversation, the odds just keep going down. So the more you're forced to put your voice out, the more comfortable you'll feel, the more participation you get overall in the classroom. And so to do that, you need to structure. It can't just be whole class discussion, seminar style, all the time. Okay. Did that sort of get at your? That's big, but I know. But teaching people how to be open and wonder, right? But basically, what you want people to enter a discussion with a little amount of wonder. Like I want to learn more, and I want to figure it out by talking. Okay. Good. All right, so let's keep that idea. So that's our goal for discussion in mind. So we don't have to discuss, I'm not saying a good teacher uses discussion 100% of the time every day. Of course not. So there's all sorts of strategies that you should use in the classroom. But when we want to discuss, we want to think, what am I trying to get my students to be able to do? How do I scaffold towards that over time, over a semester? And so you're building that skill along the way. Okay, so let's do a discussion strategy. And this is an activity called the last word, and it's an activity designed to get students to talk about a text and to get deep understanding of a text. And so I'm going to send out a handout. So again, our goal here is full participation, which there's no choice but to have that for this strategy. So part 1 of the final word activity is to give students a few minutes to get back into the text that you've assigned. And so for today, I assigned that chapter on should teachers share their political views in their classrooms. And so if you could take that out, and you're going to do the directions here, which are to review the text. So I'm right in the middle, like 1/3 of the way down the page. Sure. And you're going to identify 3 fairly short passages that fit into 3 different categories. So a passage you can read that you would say, I relate to this because, I agree with this because, I disagree with this because, or I found this to be a convincing argument because, or the most convincing, or least convincing argument. So I'm going to give you about 5 to 7 minutes to review that text and come up with 3 passages. And you don't need to write full. You can jot notes to yourself about why you selected the passage. So don't feel like you have to write full paragraphs, but this is a moment to collect your thoughts. We'll go here. Let me as a wrap up of that is just give you 3 minutes, or share around your circle and just say, what did you like, what's something that you liked about the activity, the last word, and maybe, or something that you might change if you wanted to adopt it for your classroom. So it could be something that you liked as a teacher, or it could be something that you liked as a student. Meaning, oh, I noticed this about myself in this discussion, or I think this would work. What I like about this for my students is something like that. So it's this. So go around and just do a quick share out about what do you think about the activity, the last word.
I like this. I have a loving relationship with my kids.
I wanted to alert you to the back of the handout that you got. So it's just a little bit of if you choose to use this in your classroom, some thoughts about how to set it up and maybe how to modify what questions you ask of the text or that you ask students to look for in the text as part of the preparation activity. Did anyone want to share, did any question come up in that share out? Like, I wonder if we should do this or that, or about how to do it, or what good did it, what it's good for or not good for, or comments about the activity itself. Oh, come here, what is it? How do you stop someone from talking?
The timer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, so did you guys not? Ah.
The more you do it,
Yeah, you can make a quiet ringer can help, or, right, yeah, so maybe, you're right though, it is sort of an uncomfortable thing to say, time, right? So you can, there's various things you could do. You could have a little card that says 5 seconds or something like that. But yeah, so if that becomes an issue, you could problem with
I was just gonna say, the biggest problem that I would envision would be kids not having done the reading.
Yeah.
And then you're up in grade because you don't have time to have to do the whole reading. They can fish something out of it, I suppose, in a little bit of time to give them, but it won't be as effective.
This is the same worry I had today.
She did.
I said, do they come prepared for the reading? Do they?
But that's what I was gonna say, what I said with them is that the first time they'll do that, because they can do that to me and they don't give a crap if I know they didn't do the reading. But if they do it in a peer and they're like, what the heck, why didn't you read the freaking passage? Then the next time, I guarantee they'll do it. Don't you think? I mean, my kids will do it.
100%. Yeah, so I think we teach people.
Yeah, peer pressure is better than me.
Yeah.
They don't care if I find it.
Right, same thing in a college classroom, that I like that if college students learn, some professors expect the reading done in advance and some do not. And so you doing these types of activities early on the semester communicates, in my class, I expect the reading done in advance or you will be embarrassed by your peers.
Yeah.
So that's the strategy I use, but I think that's that we teach people to read for your class. It's not just, by holding them accountable to the reading, by doing things like that. So I agree with you. But it's a problem, sure, it's a problem. Some teachers do kind of a ticket model that you have to do the pre-activity in advance, and if you haven't done that, you don't get to participate that day. So there's different things you can do to hold people accountable. But I think that what you do is they'll try to get through it the first time and then learn. I should probably do that. Not all of them, but most of them. Yeah.
I would definitely have to have it on my smart board. Okay, you talk about your part, your quote, and then you talk about this, and then you talk about that. Because even we got lost in that. I think that half of us were like, wait, did we come up with a thing? Yeah, we're the worst students, but I feel like, and it was all a good discussion, don't get me wrong, but with kids, I could see it going off the rails if, they weren't talking about what they were talking about, and also just having the timer up there, and, they finish their sentence, but actually have the timer buzzing on the smart board.
Yeah, you could be real rigid about it. Tomorrow I'm going to do an activity in which I'll be really rigid about it, where it's like every person one in each group go now, person one in each group stop now, person, but I think for this that's too much because there's too much. With the next activity I won't do that. But I think, you kind of get sentence starters as a way to help people who don't know how to respond to someone's thought on text, but you don't have to rigidly hold to them every time. But yeah, so this is just basically scaffolding. If you imagine what a great literary discussion would look like, you're sort of forcing it in a very scaffolded, regulated way to teach people what that is. Hopefully it's like a baby step. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the use of protocols with adults and with children is just it's a really effective way to keep everyone on task and to keep the conversation surrounding what you're supposed to be talking about.
Right.
Especially if you needed supports or you needed, what's next sort of things. The other thing that we really liked as a group was just the accountability of listening to each other, because full well that in a minute or so you're going to have to say something that in a response to or add on to and things like that. So there's no zoning off, there's no daydreaming, and I felt responsible to my group mates to respond to something that they said. So there's like a community building that goes on too.
Right. I'm so glad you noticed that. Listening is a major part of this.
One of the things I mentioned that you can add for an accountability is that students cite something in their document to assist when they explain something. So if I'm talking about, according to this,
Yeah.
and I believe this as well because of this.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I would probably have to modify it because I have students on so many different reading levels. So, I was constantly thinking, so how would I expect the students to just, some students can independently read, then some students probably would not be able to independently read. What ways I could modify that to ensure that everyone's successful.
Right. And maybe start with shorter passages first. Building. You can even do it with a video. You know, what part of the video did you find most interesting? So you can use the share around strategy for lots of different things. Great. Okay. Let me see where we are here. Okay. So just as a reminder that when I started out, what we were looking for good discussions are discussable questions. And for this one, the discussable question, what should teachers share their views? We had shared materials, which was the article. Students talk to each other because that is required as part of the last word activity. That there was full participation because the last word activity makes you speak the exact same amount of time. And then our students adhering to the classroom norms. That's sort of, I was going to pause if we're running a little bit out of time, but I was going to have you go back and think, well, did we have a good discussion? And I'll just say that having students ask themselves periodically, did we just have a good discussion, is a good way to help them remember what are the norms in the classroom, are we listening to each other, are we talking to each other, etc. So that is one of the, again, those are the norms. And so what did we do today as a recap was that we had that talk about polarized times, talked a little bit about what I mean by good discussion, and then we did this strategy called the last word. And I wanted to get into this controversial issue of what should count as a controversial issue. But I think what I will do is turn that into kind of tomorrow's warm-up activity, because that will lead into the next activity, which is a structured academic controversy, which is a little bit more kind of taking it up a notch in kind of complexity for students on talking about an actual controversial political issue. So I think that I will stop there for today, and we will just be super efficient tomorrow with our planning. How's that sound? Okay, good job, everyone. Thanks.